Hytale, a game that wasn't supposed to happen. A game that had a long and arduous stretch in development hell only to be bought out by one of the largest game companies on the market, canceled, and then bought again. A game that, much like the Doritos Locos Taco from Taco Bell, has a history longer than the entirety of the American Civil War. Hytale is a game that defied all odds, and despite a 10-year wait time between its announcement and its release, generated so much hype that the developers genuinely made enough money to fund the next 2 years of development just from the pre-orders alone. But most importantly, Hytale is a game that I literally fucking never heard about until like 3 days before its release. Seriously, I have no idea how these stupid ass Google algorithms that are specifically designed to get me to spend money have spent the last 10 years watching me bounce between Minecraft, Terraria, and World of Warcraft, and still didn't put two and two together and realize that I might be interested in a game that essentially looked like three of my favorite games did some sort of Dragon Ball Z fusion dance to become a single game that contained the best parts of all three. After spending the last several months balls deep into yet another bout of crippling World of Warcraft addiction, only to have my ADHD abruptly throw a fit about it and toss me into an agonizing burnout where not a single video game in my collection granted me even the smallest speck of the happy chemicals, I somehow stumbled upon a news article detailing the hype around Hytale's upcoming release date, coming just 3 days after the article was published. Now, me personally, I'm always highly skeptical about games that have a shitload of hype around them, because in my experience, the internet will be literally roaring and ranting over them, despite the actual game being like objectively mid. And then the game tends to die 2 weeks after the hype anyway. I'm looking at you, Repo, Lethal Company, Helldivers 2. Yeah, you get the picture. However, desperate for a new experience that would finally get my shoddy dopamine receptors to arise from their slumber like some sort of ancient eldritch horror, I decided to put my skepticism aside and toss $20 into pre-ordering Hytale. 2 days later, I decided to stay up all night just so I could be one of the first people to boot up the game. After spending 20 minutes customizing my avatar only to realize I genuinely couldn't make a character that didn't look like a Minecraftified e-girl, I decided to settle on this alternative trenchcoat wearing baddie and booted up a world off camera just to verify whether or not I had just been scammed out of $20. This proved to be a massive mistake on the YouTube content side of things because I genuinely spent the next 12 hours completely enamored by this game and engrossed in its mechanics while completely forgetting that I initially intended to make a video on it. After spending half a real-life day progressing through Hytale, I decided, yeah, this game's fucking cool. Let's farm YouTube content off of it. Seemingly being one of the only people on the internet who genuinely didn't hear jack shit about this game in the 10 years it was being developed, and thus being completely separated from the massive hype train surrounding it, I decided that I wanted to invoke the primal spirit of Uber Danger and record myself playing through the entirety of this ultra-hyped game so I could give an honest, unbiased, and fair review of the game without the influence of its 10 years worth of hype. And so I pressed the reset button by creating a brand new world, turning on my recording software, and getting to work. That's right. I just tricked you into watching a solid 5 minutes of introduction before we even got into the actual video. Now we can actually start talking about the gameplay. Spawning into a fresh world, cold and alone, I was ready to hit the ground running. Being an impatient bitch, I wanted nothing more than to speedrun myself back up to the same point of progression I'd left my previous world with. Stepping out into a brand new world for the first time, I immediately noticed that I had been blessed with the luckiest spawn known to man. I spawned in the middle of a massive and beautiful mountain range with an abandoned mine loaded with loot directly in front of the spawn door. I quickly gathered everything I needed to form basic stone tools, and I immediately delved into the mine to begin hoarding all it had to offer. Thankfully, my 12 hours of previous experience in my last world has already enhanced my knowledge of Hytale's combat, allowing me to absolutely beat the shit out of the skeletons and small animals that inhabited the mines, using nothing but what is essentially just a sharp rock tied to a stick. After rinsing the place for everything it had, I decided to climb the mountains closest to spawn and get right to work establishing a starter base and smelting my spoils into usable materials. On my way to the peak of the mountain, I noticed a pack of mountain goats tranquilly grazing on the side of the mountain. Now, already knowing the sheer amount of materials grinding I was going to have to partake in order to progress my crafting stations, I did what any sensible man in my situation would do. Immediately sprinted towards them and slaughtered them all. After returning to the peak of the mountain and acquiring my first crafting stations, I surveyed the land and realized that not only did I spawn directly in front of a loot-filled abandoned mine, but the mountains around spawn were absolutely slathered in even more copper than what was in the mines. So much copper, in fact, that after only about 30 minutes of game time, I was able to acquire a full suit of copper armor and a copper battle axe. Between the loot-filled mine directly in front of spawn, the giga fuck ton of copper spread around the mountains around spawn, and acquiring my starting gear and everything I needed for basic survival within the first 30 minutes of game time, things were shaping up to look like a potentially blessed run. However, this is the part of the script where I subtly and ominously foreshadow terrible events that would completely contradict the blessed run statement. So, yeah.
Ominous foreshadowing.
You see, acquiring copper gear is actually fairly easy, even if you don't get such good luck on your spawn. Mostly because it only requires copper ingots and plant fiber to craft. Iron, however, is literally the most tedious gear set to acquire, despite only being the second tier. This isn't because iron ore is uncommon or anything. No, not at all. It's actually because it requires light leather to craft. Where do you get light leather, you ask? Well, the answer is quite simple, actually. Small, usually neutral animals. Should be easy, right? No. For some fucking reason, light leather seems to be one of the rarest fucking commodities you can get your hands on in early game, which sucks massive balls because you genuinely can't progress anything without acquiring a fuck ton of light leather. So, already having that in mind, with my armor equipped and my axe in hand, I decided to waste no time in beginning a full scorched earth genocide on any and all animals that dared to enter my line of sight for even a millisecond. After spotting yet another pack of mountain goats intruding on not just my territory, but intruding on my fucking planet, I whipped out my axe and went in for the kill. And what happened next could only be described as nothing else but foreshadowing of the comically horrible luck I was about to experience with my hunt for leather.
And she hissed at me one time.
What the fuck?
Oh no!
I'm so glad I caught that on camera.
What happened?
I got kicked by an antelope and it launched me fucking 3 miles. What the fuck? After experiencing this extremely unlucky and verifiably repeatable bug that could possibly instantly kill me, you would think that I would have registered that this game is unpolished and still in early access, and that it would probably be in my best interest to turn on keep inventory as to avoid losing my sanity in the event a bug like this happened to kill me whilst in a position where I couldn't get my stuff back. But no, instead, I laughed my fucking ass off and regathered my things and continued on my hunt for leather. This will eventually prove to be an irreparable mistake that will absolutely cost me my sanity in the future.
Ominous foreshadowing.
Now that I had everything I needed for basic survival and combat, I began to venture off from my base to look for the materials I needed to level up my crafting stations. This brings us to the topic of one of my biggest gripes about Hytale. It's progression. You see, in its current state, Hytale's progression revolves around leveling your crafting stations to gain access to the recipes that allow you to craft better items. If you're one of like the 14 people who have ever played Lego Fortnite for more than 5 minutes, you would actually feel quite familiar with Hytale's crafting progression. It's very similar. I hate to make a comparison between Hytale, which is an objectively good, decent game, with Lego Fortnite, a fucking cash grab slop, but you know, it's there, unfortunately. While the system as a concept isn't bad, and the passive guidance it provides is actually quite good, the pacing of it is questionable. I don't know why I wrote questionable on the script. It's still like bad. The pacing is bad. I was only interested in leveling the workbench, armor bench, and blacksmith anvil. Each of these giving me access to higher tier tools, armor, and weapons respectively. However, each of these requires their own unique set of resources to get to tier 2. In tier 1, you can already craft copper and iron gear, and in tier 2, you gain access to thorium gear. So logically, you would assume that the most efficient route would be to work your way up to iron in early game, and then level up your crafting station so you can move on to thorium. Now, is that presumably the intended route? Yes. But is that route practical in any manner? Not even a fucking little bit. Remember earlier when I said light leather is seemingly one of the most rarest commodities in the game? Yeah, well, crafting an entire set of iron armor plus a battle axe requires a grand total of 24 light leather. While upgrading your blacksmith anvil to tier 2 to unlock thorium weapons costs 30. Meanwhile, upgrading your armor bench only costs 20 medium leather, which is much easier to acquire than light leather, because you'll be encountering many more hostile animals that drop it than you will passive animals that drop light leather. So between a tier 2 blacksmith only costing 4 more light leather than a full set of iron gear, and medium leather for your armor bench being worlds easier to get compared to light leather, it's actually much easier to pretty much skip iron gear as a whole and devote your leather to going straight from copper to thorium. Not to mention that cobalt also unlocks in tier 2, so you can technically skip from tier 1 gear straight to tier 4 gear if you really wanted to, but I digress. Oh, hey, yeah, and they also made light leather even fucking harder to find by replacing the light leather drops from these animals, editor, with medium leather. So, yeah. Anyways, cool. Yeah, back to the video. After spending a solid 20 seconds moving in a straight line away from my base to look for more light leather, I immediately got distracted by a random structure that had several of these goofy little goblins guarding it. Fucking look at these guys. They're so they're so goofy. I love them. They're low-key kind of cute. They're so funny. I love them. Anyways, taking absolutely zero time to inquire about whether or not these green little ankle biters could possibly be friendly, I opted to just slaughter them all. Thankfully, it became obvious quite quickly that these were indeed not friendly NPCs, but mobs that were actually intended to be killed. After I finished ending an entire family of goblins, I discovered that they weren't just guarding this rundown structure, but they were actually guarding a cave entrance that led to the caverns underneath. With total, reckless abandon and a zeal for adventure, I immediately began jumping down this hole to see where it led. After coming across a floor just after the cave entrance that was covered in wooden spikes, I knew that this was no ordinary cave. However, what I did not know at this time is that this was in fact my first dungeon. Completely oblivious to the implications of literal spikes being sprawled out all over the floor and the trail of several unlit torches that trace throughout the cave system, I just decided that this was a good enough opportunity to gather the combined total of 50 copper and 40 iron I needed for the bench upgrades. After a few minutes of stumbling around and just mining all the metal I saw, I eventually made my way to the actual goblin encampment, where I eagerly whipped out my weapon and began cutting through goblins and searching for loot. Now I have to admit, between the good atmosphere and the simple but flashy and snappy combat mechanics, I was having a good time. This was fucking gameplay. Hell yeah. The combat and the vibe of the whole place was actually good enough to make me not even notice the fact that this place had literally zero loot aside from a few pieces of iron and gold I found in the single chest that the whole place had. After I was done committing burglary, murder, and several other crimes against goblin kind, I was summoned by my friends via Discord to see if this story-driven, solo game review was going to be turned into a bootleg SMP. Meanwhile, my memory betrayed me, and I had no fucking clue how to get out of this cave. With zero patience and an eagerness to go bully my friends who were attempting to join my world, I decided to bust out all reliable and dig straight up to the surface and sit at my base while we all attempt to figure out how to get multiplayer to work. Which, spoiler alert, it doesn't. My friends were indeed able to connect. However, Dalton was subjected to literally unplayable lag, and Chris was enveloped by the white trademark. After spending a solid 45 minutes trying to join the world in a playable state, we abandoned the idea of multiplayer, and I went back to my quest for light leather. Since at this point I already had a grip on the basic path of progression, I decided to search for a desert while making it a point to kill absolutely everything along the way. That way, I could find the biome that contained the thorium I needed and collect the copious amounts of leather I needed along the way. Little did I know that the pursuit of this decision would lead me to fuck off 12,000 blocks away from my base, as well as lead me to collect hours upon hours of footage that are damn near unusable because it depicts nothing but me running aimlessly for miles and occasionally beating the shit out of some mobs. After arriving on the shores of the starting zone, I opened my map to plot my next move, and that's when I started to realize the true scale of Hytale's worlds. You see, Hytale's worlds are procedurally generated, just like Minecraft's are. However, where Minecraft's world generation is typically bland and boring and mostly barren of life aside from a few villages and maybe an underground structure every couple thousand blocks, Hytale's world generation creates worlds that are not only the same massive size of Minecraft's, but it also goes the extra mile by filling that land with actual content. So, when I look at the map and discover that there's an entirely different continent that contains a biome that I haven't even seen yet, looming off the shores of the lands I have already spent the last 4 fucking hours exploring, I damn well know there's going to be some good gameplay coming up. So I decided to jump off the shore and make a beeline towards the unexplored biome. After a solid 5 minutes of swimming and pillaring up the side of this island in the dead of night, I arose to see the dark and charred landscape of the devastated lands. The darkness of night, coupled with the biome's already dark and grayscale textures, meant I genuinely couldn't see shit except what my torch illuminated around me, and the bright glow of the lava deposits spread around the area. Yo, off script real quick, this place is fucking beautiful. I love the visual design of this place. It's amazing. Anyway, after being greeted by the lovely skeletal inhabitants of the area and seeing that they were donned with armor and weapons far beyond my current gear, I decided to make my visit quick. I began sprinting around and looking for anything useful I could collect before making my hasty departure. Now I have to admit, between the absolute utter darkness and only being able to see a few blocks in front of me, along with knowing that the mobs here would absolutely beat the shit out of me if I wasn't careful, I was admittedly a little on edge. Though I must say, fighting high-level mobs with low-level gear is actually really fun. Like, it's a blast, because it takes genuine, careful timing with your attacks and parries to actually kill something without getting sent back to your bed. After winning a 2v1 against mobs that way outleveled me, I was feeling pretty confident that I could stay here for a little bit. But that feeling was cut short by coming within 10 blocks of the silhouette of a giant skeleton warrior who was surrounded by 4 more of the skeletons I just had to sweat my ass off to kill. Now, I've always considered it quite hard for a video game to actually, genuinely scare me, but holy shit. I think I pissed my copper leggings. I immediately sprinted in a straight line right the fuck out of there. I was terrified. That was the biggest jump scare I had ever experienced in any game like this before. And I've played Minecraft horror mods before. This shit scared the fuck out of me. But just as I was approaching the shoreline, I spotted a vein of adamantium that I promptly collected before diving headfirst into the ocean and swimming for my life. If I'm leaving this place with pissed pants, I'm at least leaving with some fucking high-level ore for my trouble. After swimming across the ocean yet again, I made it to the icy reaches of this snow biome, an absolute masterpiece of world design. A beautiful place that easily hits into the top 5 of my favorite video game environments I've ever encountered. Maybe it's because I'm a big fan of winter. Or maybe it's because of my obsession with Northrend and the Lich King from World of Warcraft. I don't know. I'm clueless. But the colors and the overall vibes of this zone were absolutely phenomenal. And I'm honestly pretty eager to get to editing the footage where I explore this place a lot deeper. But for now, I've already been yapping for 30 fucking minutes. So we'll save it for another episode and get to the good parts. So here's a rundown of my first visit to this place. Got onto shore. Walking around. Oh cool, some cobalt. Boats. Oh, there's a village too. Burglary. Penguins. Do they drop light leather? Animal cruelty. Aw, more walking around. A castle tower. What are these dudes? Ow, that fucking hurt. Run to the water. Ha, they can't swim. Murder. More murder. Oh shit, a rare sword. More burglary. And then I left. Believe it or not, that entire sequence of events was actually 2.5 hours worth of gameplay. After departing the icy lands with my bags full of loot and a shiny new weapon, I continued my hunt for a desert and eventually came across a regular old grassy biome, several thousand blocks away from spawn. And after spending yet another couple hours running around and aimlessly slaughtering every animal in my field of view, I finally, after several hours of gameplay, had enough light leather to upgrade my blacksmith anvil. Several thousand blocks away from spawn, and an unreasonable amount of time later, I was finally able to progress from Tier 1 to Tier 2 on a single crafting station. Overwhelmed with relief, I decided it wasn't even worth the effort to walk all the way back to spawn. So instead, I opted to find this lovely little plateau nestled on the edge of the magical Azure Forest, and I built myself a new camp with the intention of building a full base somewhere nearby. I placed down my new crafting stations and a new bed, and I set my hide into the tanning bench to process into leather. However, the time it takes for the tanning bench to process leather is insufferably long per piece, and I am an impatient bitch. So I decided to do some cave diving for some more iron since I didn't get enough cobalt for a full set of armor. I delved into the nearest cave, and once I hit the lava caves, I began gathering up all the iron and having fun harassing the local inhabitants of these spicy underground catacombs. But eventually, my inattentive sprinting through these caves led me to turn a corner and be suddenly face to face with what is hands down the scariest fucking monster in this whole game. A giant skeleton? A void knight? A fire golem? No. I found myself face to face with Mr. Foreshadowing himself. iced out by a fucking lava frog. God fucking damn it. Why are these things so goddamn powerful? Seriously, fucking nerf them. God damn it. Rage noises. Now, you might be asking, why is it such a big deal? You're close to your base anyway. Just go get your stuff back, which is an absolutely reasonable response. But let's remember what I said way back at the beginning of this episode. This will eventually prove to be an irreparable mistake that will absolutely cost me my sanity in the future. Instead of respawning at the bed that I literally just placed down 15 minutes ago in an open area on top of a fucking plateau, the game decided that that bed was obstructed. And then it sent me all the way back to fucking spawn, 12,000 blocks away from my tier 2 anvil and my chestfuls of ores and materials that I had just spent the last several fucking hours acquiring. Essentially nullifying all of the progress I've made up to this point. And this is how I found out that beds were actually bugged at this point in time. And not only did I spawn an unreasonably long distance away from my things, but I was actually too far from that bed for it to show up on my compass. So I had absolutely no hope of even being able to find my old base or any of my things. Absolutely crushed by this crippling setback, I closed the game and called it a night. Is this the end of my Hytale playthrough? Will I ever get back those several hours worth of progress? Or will I simply cut my losses and do it all again? Or perhaps this is the part of the script where I leave you on a half-assed, poorly written cliffhanger because this episode has already ran well past what I initially intended, and quite frankly, I have no fucking clue what I'm doing, and can barely read the script that I wrote, and would like to kind of be done with it. I guess we'll just have to find out next time on... Put this part like after the outro sequence or whatever, Mr. Future Me editor. Hi, I have no fucking clue what I'm doing. I watched a little bit too much Uber Danger and Pint during my latest WoW phase, and I was like, I can make this content. Apparently it's really fucking hard. I have no fucking clue what I'm doing, dude. This is going to be a long form series that will probably end up getting better as it goes, as I like continue to learn how to develop this kind of content. But this is just like a test run right now to see if I can make this kind of content to begin with. So if you want to see all that, stay tuned, leave a like, comment, subscribe, do all that cool YouTube shit, and I will see you next episode. Okay, bye.